welcome to Tracy Momi Reads. I am back again with another video. Today, I am going to be talking about a popular book from the Bookstagram, Book Talk world I saw it everywhere before it released. And I will tell you that initially I was kind of like, I don't know if this is my thing, because I'm not a big fan of historical fiction from the standpoint that that's the entirety of the book, that it's historical fiction. Although one of my favorite books is Wake of the Wind by J. California Cooper, I feel like that was an anomaly, right? Or so I thought. Most of the books that I have read that have that are historical fiction, like Opal and Nev, Daisy Jones and the Six, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, they have present and past mentions, and in the past mentions, there's some historical value, right? That is accurate, and kind of makes you harken back to those times, but it's very much a modern day story, if you will. So when I saw Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christoper Murray, I was like, I don't know, I might pass on that one. But then I read the blurb and I was intrigued because even though this is very much a historical fiction category book, okay, it is based on true events. Okay, so or maybe alleged true events, I don't know, but there's so much truth in here interwoven with the main story that I found it to be an enjoyable read. And per usual, I was on the internet Googling and searching for pictures of these people and trying to cross-reference a lot of the historical things that happened, and they all happened except for the main plot of the story that's alleged. But they said there's a pretty good account that it probably actually happened. And let me tell you what I mean if you have no idea what Harlem Rhapsody is about. The crux of the story is about an affair between the esteemed W.E.B. Du Bois and a woman by the name of Jessie Redmond Fawcett, who she was esteemed in her own right as well. And, I'm familiar with him as a historical figure in Black American history, right? But I'm going to read so that I give him his proper credentials, okay? So W.E.B. Du Bois was a pioneering sociologist, historian, and civil rights activist known for his influential role in advocating for African American rights and his foundational contributions to sociology. So he was born in 1868, and this book, it takes place in the 20s, 1927, I think is when it starts, or maybe 19, I'm not sure now, because I thought but it was early. He was probably in his 40s, maybe when the events of this happened, or potentially had just turned 50 or something like that. But not only was, especially for the times, keep in mind, this man's born in 1868. This stuff is happening early 1900s. He had a PhD, okay? A PhD from Harvard University, a Black man. And we all know the history of this country, despite how much they're trying to erase it. Because I know it makes folks uncomfortable, but it happened. And you can't erase it. There are descendants of the people whose history you're trying to erase here. We're proof that it happened. We have the stories, right? So anyway, so he achieved a lot. He was a very educated man. So the doctor, they called him Dr. Du Bois. So the doctor, he had earned that title. He had a doctorate from Harvard. He was very vocal on trying to establish rights for Black people or African Americans, whatever term you want to use. I'm just going to say Black for the purposes of my video. But he had also founded a paper. Like it was like a newspaper or a newsletter. It had things to do with I think what he was trying to do with this particular publication is shine a light on the excellence of Black people, because the narratives have been painted of ignorance and uneducated and things like that. So in the Crisis, they featured literary works, a lot of literary works from up and coming writers, poets, different stories, and as well as giving some information on successful grassroots things that were happening in the Black community, just to give people hope. They could go to this paper where they could see their people being spotlighted in a very positive way, and progress that was being made to help just move us forward on a social level, a racial level, and an American level, right? And so this woman, Jessie Redmond Fawcett, real person, he hired her to come on as the literary editor for the Crisis. And her main job, she was an editor, but she was charged with, because she was a writer in her, she was a writer also. And she was charged with finding new voices and bringing these works of these Black people to the Crisis, to publish. The paper was, they were in Harlem, hence the name, Harlem Rhapsody. They were in Harlem, but they sent the paper out throughout the country. Like a lot of people got the paper, and they had connections in Europe, so it was a pretty big damn deal back then. And she also mentored a lot of the people whose work would be published in the Crisis. And the most famous among her mentees was Langston Hughes. Now, there is so much historical reference and so many names and people in this particular book. I mean, I could just do a video alone on giving like maybe a historical lesson and giving information on who these people are and what they've achieved. But I'll let you do your own work, because I'm here to talk about the book, right? And I feel like we're already kind of getting off track. But people like Langston Hughes, Jean Toomer, County Cullen, and Nella Larson, who was a friend of hers. And Nella Larson wrote a book back like then. I can't even remember what the date was. I'll have to find it. But because I looked it up, because I was doing so much deep diving when I was reading. But she wrote a book called Passing, and it was a fictional tale of this woman who was very, very fair-skinned, but she was Black. But she, back then, given the way that the United States was operating in the world at large, it was better. You were treated better, it was better conditions, and maybe you had better opportunities if you were not Black. So she was very, very fair-skinned, and the woman in the book, she passed for white is what they were called. They called it passing, where maybe the countenance of someone, like you see people even now that may be biracial, and sometimes depending on what their parentage is, they may come across as racially ambiguous. You don't know, what, like, hey, what are you, and so there was a whole bunch of people that were able to do that because of the mixed bloodlines during slavery. But this woman in the book, she passed, and she married this guy who was actually white and he was rich, yada, yada. But that story, just like a few years ago, was made into a Netflix movie. And we're talking about a story that was published back in like the 1920s or something. That is crazy to have that kind of longevity or that kind of reach, or for your work to spark interest decades, almost a century after you wrote it. That's incredible. Okay, history lesson over. So, Harlem Rhapsody. I heard a lot of people say that they wish the book would have been more just kind of focused on what was accomplished back then, as opposed to the affair because that's why we're here. The affair between W.E.B. Du Bois and Jessie Fawcett. But I feel like if that part wasn't in here, that then you would just be writing a historical book. It would just be a nonfiction book that, told the account of how these people got famous and, different things, because the historical accuracy, the research that Victoria Christoper Murray had to do is outstanding. I mean, and she even has, I think there's like historical notes and like stuff at the back of the book where you can, kind of follow along or where she got information from. But I found it intriguing because, like I said, even though I'm not like a diehard fan of historical fiction, I do find it fascinating the way people lived before now and how they essentially had some of the same concerns and did some of the same things, good or bad, as people in modern day history. It was just a different social climate, right? I feel like, okay, so Jessie was very, and we're just going to, go from the way that she's portrayed in the book. Again, this was a real person. We don't know, like, if this was really her or what. But again, there was some documentation and some of the places that they showed up together, it's well documented. So it's kind of like you fill in the blanks. But the way she's portrayed in the book, Jessie was very, and this was interesting for a woman back then because she was also educated. She had a master's degree, and she was very career-minded, which, again, back then, there was even a part there, women weren't even allowed to vote. Like, that happened during the book and while she was at the crisis, right? And I think the way it happened first, like, white women got the right to vote and then black women, like, much later. But most women back then, it was like their role was just really to be housewives and have children and take care of their man, who was 9 times out of 10 the primary breadwinner, and he's the one that had the career and that went off and lived his life while you were, pretty much taking care of home. And Jessie wasn't like that. She was like 38 and she was single. She didn't have any kids, and she was hyper focused on being a career woman. Her main goal, she wanted to be editor of the crisis, but that was W.E.B.'s baby, and he wasn't going to get that up. I mean, the writing was on the wall with that. But I feel like, and she even said this herself, she didn't want to get married, and she didn't want to have children. And I think that there may be a demographic of women who choose to have relationships with married men for that reason, because they know it's not going to go anywhere. I get to have companionship, potentially depending on the man's financial status. Maybe he's helping to take care of her. Maybe he's giving her money or buying her things. But at the end of the day, and maybe at the end of the night, he's going home to his family. So I feel like some women who are in that, and maybe even men, I don't know, who are in that position, they feel like they have the best of both worlds. I don't have to be the one to necessarily cater to this person or wash their underwear, but I get to enjoy their company. I get to have that physical relationship, the intellectual relationship, because that's very much what it was here. Like, Jessie really admired him. I mean, what's not to be admired for all that he accomplished back then, like, given the times. But we learned that, a man is a man is a man in some instances. It doesn't matter how educated they are. It doesn't matter how righteous they are for the cause, because W.E.B. had other women, not just her. He had his wife, he had her, and other women. And he, in the book, allegedly, he told her that he had different needs, and it was never specified what they were. But while she maybe could satisfy some of them, she wasn't going to be able to satisfy all of them. And I think that speaks to, again, the broader conversation around men who have affairs. I don't think that it is always, or maybe even ever, a case where they don't love their wives or that they don't want their family. They very much want that, because otherwise maybe they wouldn't be in that situation. They'd find a way to disentangle themselves from it. But I think that, Chris Rock said this in a stand-up many, many moons ago. He said that men are only as faithful as their opportunities. And if you are a powerful man, like W.E.B. Du Bois was back then, and didn't look like he was too bad looking, He had traveled, he had these degrees, he had money, he had status. I'm sure women were just like, just all over him and flirting and again, if he saw the opportunity and he had these so-called needs and desires, and it sounded like his wife, long as he didn't embarrass her or maybe bring home another baby, it sounded like she was okay. And I think you have some women that have that, type of mindset. If they're being taken care of and you want to go do your thing, there's a lot of women that may have those type of situations or open marriages. As for me, I am a firm believer in, we only get this one life, right? And if you have these desires and that's going to make you happy and you can do it, but you don't need to be with me. You know what I'm saying? But why tie yourself down to one person? Be single and spread yourself around like the bees do to the flowers. But don't commit to someone and potentially have to deal with the fallout of that and the heartbreak of that. If you want to walk away from a situation, but that's the thing I've never understood. And I don't know if it's greed or, like I said, the person, usually men, we're just going to talk about men in this instance. Maybe they really love this woman and they know she is like the type of woman who they should be with, who is going to help them reach new levels, who is going to give them respectability, who people love or whatever. And maybe it strokes their ego to say, I got her. But then she's not enough for you. So, you know what I'm saying? She don't have you, and that's not fair. And a lot of people will make the argument that humans, and maybe men specifically, weren't created to be monogamous. And that's fine. Again, don't get in a committed relationship or make the person you're with think that you want that if it's not what you want. Go live your life. You're entitled to that. I'm not going to be on that ride with you, though. Okay? So anyway, having said that, the things that I loved about this book, again, the historical context and the detail to the time period, from the dress to the way that Harlem was, up and coming, and it was bustling right before the Harlem Renaissance happened. I loved that. I personally did not have a problem with the whole affair thing because it wasn't. First of all, it's not graphic by any nature. I mean, especially given the times, it's just, I fell into his arms, or he made me float above the mattress, or whatever. It's very poetic. It's definitely not something steamy, because that would just totally not make sense for the time period that this book encapsulates. But I did feel like after a while, it started to be so much to keep up with, because there were so many, and I get it. I think that the author was probably trying to give us a better idea of, while a lot of people may be familiar with W.E.B. Du Bois, a lot of people don't know who she was. This is the first time I'd ever heard of her when I picked up this book. And I'm like, this is a real person, a real woman who had a huge impact. Never heard of her, right? So I know that she probably was trying to give us more about who Jessie was and what she did and all of her accomplishments. But for me, in a fictional book, it just got to be too much to digest. I found myself flipping through, but then when I got to one chapter, I'm like, oh wait, so okay, let me go back. So I ended up reading the whole thing anyway. But I found it very enjoyable. The only thing I can say by way of triggers is, again, the social climate back then. the world at large was not kind to black people at all. At all. So, and that was one of the things that they were trying to do, was, you know, give our people a platform and to try to show the world, number one, we're human. And number two, we want the same thing everybody else wants, to be safe, happy, healthy, have our children grow up in safe environments, and, you know, that type of thing. So, you know, it's always hard for me, and that may be the thing that turns me off about historical fiction as it relates to having to read and get these visuals about how my ancestors were treated. So, you know, there's some stuff in there. I mean, they talk about lynchings. I mean, it's not described. It's just like they saw it on the news or they heard about it. You know what I'm saying? So they don't shy away from that in the book. So if you don't want to read about that, then don't. Let me go back real quick. One thing I will say, Jessie was actually raised, her dad was a preacher, and he married a white woman. Her dad was black, but her mom had passed away, so this lady wasn't her mother. He was pretty much raised by this white woman, and I think they called him integrationist. And this white woman was telling her, this affair, this ain't it, baby girl. This man does not, he cared about Jessie in that he knew how intelligent she was and how she would draw people to the paper, but she was just another affair, you know. And her mom was trying to tell her stepmom was trying to tell her, you should be able to do your job without having this relationship with him. And her stepmom was not feeling him or that whole relationship. She didn't give a damn who W.E.B. Du Bois was. She was looking at, you were having an affair with my daughter, and she did not respect him based on that. Nobody in her family did, because she had a sister and a brother or whatever. But yeah, it was just so deep to go down that rabbit hole. But like I said, after a while, it was kind of like, okay, all right, this is a lot. This is becoming more like nonfiction than fiction in a lot of spots. But overall, you see I flagged a lot of pages. Overall, I found it to be entertaining, informative, and engrossing in a lot of parts. Just know this is not a real easy read. It's not a quick read, and you got to be ready and focused when you dive into Harlem Rhapsody, okay? If you have read Harlem Rhapsody, let me know your thoughts in the comments. You know, did you find it to be a lot to kind of keep track of? Is that the type of books you normally read? I'd love to start a dialogue in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Make sure that you like this video and go ahead and take the opportunity to subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.